Everyone at the downtown library knew her as Margaret, the patient volunteer who'd been helping patrons for 5 years without ever missing a shift. Friendly but private, helpful but humble, the kind of person who made libraries feel like safe spaces. What they didn't know was that Margaret wasn't her real name, and libraries weren't the only places she'd learned to find hidden information. Welcome to Stories from Us. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden identity and international espionage, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These moments matter more than you know. Margaret Collins had been volunteering at the downtown public library for 5 years, arriving promptly every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday to help with book returns, catalog updates, and research assistance for patrons who needed guidance navigating the vast world of information that surrounded them. She was a woman in her early 50s, average height, with brown hair always pulled back in a neat bun, wire-rimmed glasses that gave her a scholarly appearance, and the kind of quiet reliability that made libraries function smoothly. The library staff adored her. She never arrived late, never complained about tedious tasks, and approached every responsibility with the methodical precision that comes naturally to some people and must be learned through years of discipline by others. Patrons appreciated her patience, her ability to track down the most obscure research materials, and her genuine interest in helping them find exactly what they needed, no matter how complex or unusual their requests might be. Margaret's personal background was something of a mystery to her colleagues, though not in a way that raised suspicions. She mentioned being retired, spoke occasionally about being widowed, and explained that she had no children but found fulfillment in community service. She lived modestly in a small apartment downtown, drove a reliable sedan, and seemed to lead the kind of quiet, unremarkable life that many people found enviable in its simplicity. What absolutely no one at the library knew, what no one in her current life could have imagined, was that Margaret Collins wasn't her real name. Her actual identity was Dr. Elizabeth Liz Hawthorne, and for 22 years she had served as one of the CIA's most effective intelligence analysts, specializing in the detection and analysis of foreign espionage networks operating on American soil. Liz had spent more than 2 decades immersed in the hidden world of international intelligence, where information was currency, patterns revealed intentions, and the ability to spot anomalies in seemingly normal behavior could mean the difference between national security and catastrophic intelligence breaches. She'd analyzed Soviet spy networks during the final years of the Cold War, tracked emerging threats in the post-Soviet era, and developed techniques for identifying hostile intelligence operations that had become standard training material for new CIA analysts. Her specialty had been pattern recognition and behavioral analysis, the art of seeing connections that others missed, of identifying the subtle signs that distinguished legitimate activities from carefully constructed covers for espionage operations. She could read encrypted communications like others, read newspapers, spot false identities with the same ease most people recognized faces, and trace the complex networks of contacts, meetings, and information transfers that revealed how spy rings actually operated in the real world. The decision to leave the CIA had been entirely her own. After 22 years of living in the shadows, of constant vigilance and carefully maintained cover identities, she'd grown weary of a life where trust was always conditional, and relationships were always potentially compromised by professional necessities. When her husband John died of a heart attack at 57, she'd realized that she wanted to spend whatever years remained to her living openly, honestly, without the constant weight of secrets and the isolation that came with them. The agency had provided her with a complete new identity as part of her retirement package. Margaret Collins, retired insurance adjuster, widow, no children, clean background that would withstand casual scrutiny while providing the security she needed to live safely outside the intelligence community. The documentation was flawless, the backstory carefully constructed, and the financial arrangements ensured she could live comfortably without ever needing to reveal her true background. For 5 years, Margaret had believed she'd successfully transitioned to a normal life. The library work gave her purpose without pressure, human connection without the constant calculation of who could be trusted with what information. She'd grown genuinely fond of her colleagues, developed relationships with regular patrons, and found satisfaction in helping people access information openly rather than secretly gathering intelligence for purposes they would never know about. Until that quiet Wednesday afternoon when her two worlds collided in the most unexpected way. Margaret was processing interlibrary loan requests, a routine task that involved reviewing patron requests for books not available in their local collection and coordinating with other libraries to arrange borrowing privileges. Most requests were straightforward: academic researchers seeking specialized texts, students working on thesis projects, or general readers interested in rare or out-of-print books that might be available elsewhere. But on this particular afternoon, something caught her attention. Within the span of 2 hours, she'd processed 6 different requests from 6 different patrons, all asking for books that shared a very specific and unusual focus. Soviet intelligence operations in Eastern Europe, 1975 to 1985, cryptographic methods in Cold War communications, counterintelligence techniques in urban environments, deep cover operations, lessons from the KGB, signal intelligence in human sources, and operational security in hostile territory. Individually, each request might have been explained as academic research, historical interest, or professional development for someone in law enforcement or security. But taken together within such a short time frame and requested by patrons who had no apparent academic affiliations or professional reasons for needing such specialized material, the pattern triggered alarm bells that Margaret hadn't heard in 5 years. She pulled up the patron records for each person who'd made these requests. Different names, different addresses, different background information. But as she studied the details, inconsistencies began to emerge. All 6 had become library members within the past 8 months. All were listed as being between the ages of 35 and 45. All had local addresses, but virtually no borrowing history beyond these specialized requests. All had similar patterns of computer usage, accessing the library's internet terminals for brief periods, always using privacy settings that prevented automatic storage of browsing history. This was precisely the kind of pattern that Margaret's CIA training had taught her to recognize: multiple individuals with constructed identities conducting coordinated research into topics that would be valuable to foreign intelligence services. Her analytical instincts, dormant for 5 years but never truly extinguished, began firing on all cylinders. That evening at home, Margaret violated every promise she'd made to herself about leaving the intelligence world behind. Using skills she'd hoped never to need again, she began conducting the kind of deep background research that had once been her specialty. The names on the library applications led to addresses that, upon closer examination, showed signs of being covers rather than genuine residences. The personal information provided by each patron contained subtle inconsistencies that suggested carefully constructed false identities rather than authentic biographical details. More troubling still, when she cross-referenced the timing of their library memberships with other data points, local news reports, public records, even social media activity in the area, she began to see evidence of a coordinated effort to establish what intelligence professionals called legend, deep cover identities that could withstand casual scrutiny while providing access to valuable targets. The next day at the library, Margaret began observing the patrons on her list with the trained eye of a professional analyst. She noted their behavior patterns, their interaction styles, the way they moved through the building and used its resources. 3 of them visited the library during her Thursday shift, and she watched them with the kind of attention that once would have been focused on potential enemy agents in Moscow or Berlin. What she saw confirmed her worst suspicions. These weren't amateur researchers or curious citizens. They were trained professionals conducting a carefully orchestrated intelligence operation. They moved with the kind of calculated awareness that comes from extensive training. They maintained what appeared to be casual distance from each other while actually coordinating their activities through subtle signals. Most telling of all, they were using the library's computer system not just to access information, but to communicate with each other and potentially with handlers outside the area. Margaret realized that she was witnessing something far more serious than simple book research. The library's interlibrary loan system, its public computer access, and its generally unmonitored environment made it an ideal location for conducting intelligence operations. The requests for specific books weren't just research. They were encoded communications with titles, dates, and catalog numbers serving as elements of a sophisticated cipher system. By Friday, when 3 of the suspects appeared in the library simultaneously for the first time, Margaret had enough evidence to understand that she was dealing with an active Russian intelligence cell using the public library as their primary communication hub. The beauty of their system was its invisibility. Who would suspect that routine library activities were actually cover for espionage operations? But they hadn't counted on their chosen location being staffed by someone with 22 years of experience in detecting exactly this kind of activity. That weekend, Margaret faced a decision that forced her to confront the reality that she could never truly leave the intelligence world behind. She had uncovered what appeared to be an active foreign intelligence operation on American soil, and her obligation as a former CIA officer was clear. But reporting it would mean breaking the careful anonymity she'd maintained for 5 years and potentially exposing herself to the kind of scrutiny and danger she'd hoped to escape forever. On Monday morning, she made the call that changed everything. Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, FBI Counterintelligence Division, came the voice on the other end of the phone. Sarah, this is Liz Hawthorne. I need to speak with you about an urgent security matter. The silence on the other end of the call lasted several seconds. Sarah Mitchell had been Margaret's colleague during her final years at the CIA, one of the few people who knew about her retirement and new identity. Liz? My God, we thought you'd disappeared completely. Where are you calling from? I'm in Denver, working as a library volunteer. Sarah, I've stumbled onto what appears to be a Russian intelligence operation using the public library system for communications and coordination. Are you certain? Margaret spent the next 20 minutes detailing her observations, her analysis of the patron records, and her assessment of the operational methods being employed. Sarah's responses grew increasingly serious as the scope of what Margaret had discovered became clear. Liz, this is enormous. What you're describing could be part of a much larger network that we've been trying to identify for months. Can you meet with our Denver field office? Yes, but my cover identity needs to be protected. As far as anyone knows, I'm Margaret Collins, retired insurance adjuster. Understood. But Liz, your analytical skills haven't diminished at all. What might have taken our field office months to piece together, you've identified in less than a week. The FBI operation that followed was swift and decisive. Using Margaret's intelligence as a foundation, federal agents were able to identify, monitor, and ultimately arrest a 6-person Russian intelligence cell that had been operating undetected for over a year. The network had been gathering information about local military installations, defense contractors, and government facilities that could have caused significant damage to national security if it had remained operational. Margaret's role in the operation remained classified, her identity protected through careful coordination between the FBI and her former colleagues at the CIA. To the library staff and patrons, she remained simply Margaret Collins, the helpful volunteer who'd been temporarily unavailable due to a family emergency during the week when several library patrons were arrested on unrelated federal charges. But Margaret's life had changed in ways that couldn't be undone. The FBI approached her about serving as a consultant, using her analytical skills and her position at the library to help identify future threats. She agreed, understanding that her quiet retirement had evolved into a different kind of service, one that allowed her to protect her adopted community while maintaining the anonymity she valued. From that point forward, Margaret continued her volunteer work at the library with renewed purpose. To outward appearances, nothing had changed. She still helped patrons find books, still processed loan requests, still led story time for children on Tuesday afternoons. But now her work had an additional dimension, as she quietly monitored the library's systems and patron activities for signs of the kind of threats that most people never imagined could exist in such peaceful, ordinary places. The library remained a sanctuary for learning and community connection, but it was now also protected by someone with the skills and experience to recognize when that sanctuary was being threatened. Margaret Collins continued to be the patient, helpful volunteer that everyone knew and appreciated. But she was also Elizabeth Hawthorne, guardian of secrets and protector of the innocent people who never suspected that their quiet library held dangers as well as knowledge. Elizabeth Hawthorne never needed a badge to be a protector, never needed recognition to know her worth, and never needed an official title to serve her country. She found meaning in service itself, whether analyzing international threats from a CIA office or protecting her local community from a library desk. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about what people do when everyone's watching. They're about what people do every single day when no one's paying attention. The quiet guardians who walk among us, carrying skills and knowledge we never think to ask about, ready to protect us from dangers we never imagined could exist in our ordinary, peaceful lives. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Elizabeth Hawthorne? Someone whose humble service concealed extraordinary expertise and the ability to protect others from threats they never saw coming? Share their name in the comments. Tell us how they taught you that protection comes in many forms, that expertise doesn't always announce itself, and that the most important guardians are often the ones who serve without ever seeking recognition. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe to help us honor the quiet protectors who deserve to be remembered. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, remember, the next time you see someone doing ordinary work with extraordinary attention to detail, look a little closer. You might be standing next to a guardian.